Yeah, the covenant that Baha'u'llah revealed, that Abdulbaha delineated, and that Showqi-Effendi constituted in this Universal House of Justice, has to have a point of unity. This is the facilitator of the meeting and the executive branch of the House of Justice. And this is the fulfillment of the continuation of the throne line of King David that goes back to ancient times, because this is the sign that God gave that the people will be able to recognize the coming of the kingdom of God. And if Baha'u'llah was not a descendant of King David, from the throne line of the exiled monarchs of King David, the exilarchs, the Resh Galuta, Ras al Jalut, he wouldn't fulfill the prophecies, and the people of the previous revelations wouldn't be able to recognize Baha'u'llah as the true one. And then they wouldn't have the trust that this is the gift that God gave for the solution of the world's ills and for personal growth and development. That the role that Pepe played is the role of the placeholder under the three-part covenant of Moses of the blessing and the curse and the regathering. That during Mason Remy's lifetime, from 1874 to 1974, this was the time of the great blessing of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. And then in 1957, when Showqi-Effendi was killed in London, we have the violation of the covenant take place, and the curse of the scattering of the people comes upon us. And this is at the time when Mason adopted Pepe to be his son. And when Mason passed on in 1974, his son, Abdulbaha's grandson, Pepe Agsan, became the guardian of the Baha'i faith from 1974 until 1994. And while we were setting up the Second International Baha'i Council, Joseph Pepe Remy was the legal president of the Second International Baha'i Council. And me, having been adopted and appointed by him at that time in the same manner and style that Abdulbaha adopted and appointed Mason Remy, was listed as the heir apparent at that time. Pepe stayed in Florence, Italy, and he never came to the United States in the Rocky Mountains and attended our community gatherings or meetings. That he had written a letter that said as long as the establisher of the Baha'i faith, Dr. Leland Jensen, was alive in the world, his role would be to be a do-nothing guardian. So Pepe didn't do anything other than be a placeholder during the time of the ministry of the establisher of the Baha'i faith, Dr. Jensen. And to some people, he wrote and said that he was a Baha'i. And to other people who pressed him, if he was a Baha'i or not, he would say that he didn't belong to the organized Baha'i religion, such as the ones that the Hands set up. So the letters of Pepe and the things that Pepe did and wrote are difficult for some of the people to understand. And he said that circumstances forced him to do the things that he did in order to guard the faith and remain loyal to his responsibilities, fidelity to Mason Remy. And he said he was dedicated to redeeming Mason Remy's name amongst all the people of the world. This is one of the reasons why I think that Pepe chose the exact same method, a part of the plan that he was instructed to do, to adopt and appoint his successor, myself, in the same way that Abdulbaha adopted and appointed Mason Remy. That the main people know that Mason Remy is the successor. This is not unknown. They're just against it. So all the stuff that the people say about Mason and Pepe are just excuses so that they can remain outside of the community. And it's not like they don't know what the truth of the thing is. They do. But Abdulbaha says that selfish motives have dragged them into this condition. And so by doing this to themselves, these individuals who find themselves in this mysterious, grievous affliction deprive themselves of the bounties and the goodness of being independent of all things save God. So Pepe's role was kind of during the time of the reestablishment, Second International Baha'i Council. And this was the main point of Joseph Pepe Rimi's guardianship. It began in 1974 and it ended in 1994. And he was to make sure that when this Second International Baha'i Council was established during his guardianship, which it was on January 9th of 1991, that the heir apparent was integrated fully into that community and participating with the establisher of the Baha'i faith in full communion and full Baha'i activities. And this is what happened. And Pepe was very successful about that. Dr. Jensen wrote to Pepe a letter, and he stated to Pepe, he says that his role as the establisher of the Baha'i faith and the seventh angel was prophesied of, and that he was the God-given mentor for Pepe as the guardian, that he was the mentor of the guardian. And then Pepe wrote back to me a letter, and he said, you should keep working with Dr. Jensen. He's your mentor. So this is the way there was sort of a cooperative dynamic happening. At the same time, Pepe remained in Italy to maintain the test on the successorship. In the Baha'i faith, the people are tested by the guardianship of the Baha'i faith, and they're tested by the point of unity and the successorship. And the reason that for this test is it's the same as the test of when God sends a promised one. It's somebody other than ourselves. Maybe the people are challenged by this. It states this in the Quran repeatedly. They don't like the way that person dresses, or they don't agree with the hairstyle they have, or something else. They become tested on a personal basis. But if we use our intellect that God gave us, our power of abstract thinking, and we use the criteria that we have to understand the reality of things, we can see that something fulfills the criteria, and therefore it's authentic and it's genuine. And when we can see that it's authentic, then we can accept it. We can't accept any group of 9 people or more claiming to be Baha'u'llah's Universal House of Justice that doesn't have the descendant of David as the president of it. The purpose of the descendant of David is the criteria by which we can recognize Baha'u'llah's true Universal House of Justice from fakes, frauds, and imitations. In this way, we won't get derailed or turn to something else. Only the true Universal House of Justice of Baha'u'llah is continuing the proper Baha'i education to get people to become independent of all save God and learn the principles of federalism. These fake and phony pseudo-guardian groups and fake Universal House of Justices, there's more than one of them set up. One of them's in Haifa. There's another one in Canada, I think, from Elders. There's some other ones. What's preventing any 9 people from getting together and claiming that they're Baha'u'llah's Universal House of Justice? The covenant. Because there has to be, one of the members is the Agsan from the family of Baha'u'llah and Abdulbaha, a natural son or a legal son, legally adopted or natural, to inherit the throne of David is a sign of God, so we can recognize the true community. And Pepe fulfilled his role as the sign of God in his day, and based on his ministry, which was over the time of the scattering, he came into the picture with Mason Ramey around 1960, 1957, before that, and he was there during the entire time of the violation of the covenant up until the time of the reestablishment and the regathering beginning on January 9th of 1991. He passed on 3 years later, and the ministry of the third president of the House of Justice. Mason's the first president, Pepe's the second one, and today I fulfill the role and position of the third one, is the one that comes in harmony with the time of the year 2001 prophesied of as al-Mustaghab in the Baha'i writings when the 9/11 happened, and is over the time of the gathering or the regathering of the people. And this is the three-part covenant of Moses: the blessing, the curse, and the regathering. Mason's role was over the blessing. There's overlap. And then Pepe was over the curse. And then the current one and my successors is over the regathering, fulfilling the third part of the covenant of Moses. And the people are being regathered under the provisions of the covenant by education. And they're coming from all the people of the world, from out of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, and the indigenous faiths. And it's an amazing thing to see. And the majority of Baha'is in the world understand and know where the covenant is, but because of the great oppression, they can't discuss this amongst themselves, and they keep this private and in secret. And until they're able to come out of the closet, the way the Babis accepted the Bab in Persia, even at the threat of horrible martyrdom in Persia, they came out and accepted the Bab. And we saw a terrific social upheaval that the Baha'i world today stands in the same precipice. And if the Baha'i people were to start coming forward and admit that they're under the provisions of the covenant too, they would face social shunning and social ostracization, and they would receive stigma. And in countries where the Baha'i faith is controversial, they've threatened to turn the Baha'is of the covenant over to the authorities if they come out and say that they're under the covenant. We saw this problem in Syria and in some other places where the Baha'is under the covenant are amongst the main Baha'i population. So until this can get worked out, we're kind of in a state of suspended animation. The world, with all of its warring nations, and it stands at the same precipice as the Baha'i world stands. The same way the Baha'is are unable to come out en masse and declare that they're under the provisions of the covenant and elect their local and national councils, the people of the world are under a great repression and oppression. Not from the hands of the cause of God and Ria Canoe, but from international corporations and banking and warmongers and whatever the power elite is up to, there's an oppression. And so this is simultaneous. At the same time, the Baha'i people of the 7 main different Baha'i groups are able to come out and admit and proclaim their fidelity and their loyalty to God and the recognition of the Davidic kingship in their day, the nations of the world will, and the people will be able to also come out and have justice and fairness for all and elect the international parliament of human beings. So these two processes, both inside the Baha'i community and the influence of the Baha'i community inside the greater picture of the 7 revealed religions of the world, are connected, are corresponding, in correspondence with each other. But the supreme influence of the operating reality behind the scenes comes from God and the divine reality itself. So Pepe, again, was his ministry was over the curse, Mason's over the blessing, and the current guardian and the successorship after that him, and the lineage holder of today, which is myself, is over the regathering. And during the lifetime of Dr. Jensen, Pepe had written that he'd be a do-nothing guardian. He passed on in 94, and it was 2 years later, in 1996, that Dr. Jensen ascended. So he was do-nothing in the sense of maybe performing the executive function as an active member of the House of Justice and being a declared Baha'i, giving clarity to all the people of the world to what his true position and feelings were outwardly. But in the circumstance of the violation of the covenant in 1957 and the reestablishment of the Universal House of Justice in its appointed stage on January 9th of 1991, Pepe was the guardian over this time period of the curse that had come upon the people, and his participation and the things he did have helped to alleviate the problems that resulted in the breaking of the covenant in the first place. And the main thing that his teaching effort was about independent thinking. Some of the believers wrote to him and said the head should come forward and chair the meetings of the body. And he wrote back and he says, what does it matter if the head comes forward if we don't have a true body of believers? Meaning that each of the Bahais has to be an independent investigator of the truth. They have to see the truth with their own eyes, not through the eyes of the guardian, and not through the eyes of Abdulbaha and Bahaullah and the Baha. They have to get educated by their teacher, whether that's the Bahaullah and Abdulbaha or whoever, and still see and experience reality directly and immediately for themselves. There's no blind following here. And the reason is a democracy only works and is only as strong as the weakest member. And the weakest member in the Baha'i community today under the provisions of the covenant is a very strong, independent investigator of the truth, who can see the truth with their own eyes, who's read the text themselves, who's investigated reality themselves, who's used their intellect to see if this fulfills the criteria or not. And the criteria for recognizing the true council of the Universal Justice Bahaullah is the one with the divisive king as the president of it, and that makes it authentic. And if it's authentic, we can accept it, because authenticity is the criteria of believability. Because the Davidic kingship is preserved today, this shows that Baha'u'llah is authentic as the coming of the promised one who was to be a descendant of David. If the guardianship of the Baha'i faith came to an end and the throne line of David ended, it says in Psalms 89, it'll never end. So if it's gone and it's ended, then this would mean Baha'u'llah is false. So the reason we have the descendants of David today, that we're able to recognize the criteria of the true house of justice, and if it's authentic, we can believe in it, is because this true universal house of justice with the Davidic kingship fulfills the prophecy of Baha'u'llah's mission. If we didn't have the Davidic kingship as the presidency of today's universal house of justice, Baha'u'llah's prophetic mission would have been unfulfilled. So the recognition of the house of justice through the Davidic kingship is the criteria that Baha'u'llah fulfills in his mission of the fulfillment of prophecy. He fulfills prophecy by his prophesied name, his prophesied date, his prophesied address, and his prophesied mission to reveal the house of justice with the Davidic king as the president, as stated in the book of Isaiah, chapter 2, chapter 9, and chapter 11. And so this gives authenticity to Baha'u'llah. And authenticity is the criteria for believability. If there was no house of justice in the world today that had a Davidic king as the president, then Baha'u'llah would be false. And this is why the Sam's Guardians are promoting that Baha'u'llah is false. When they teach that the Davidic kingship came to an end and the guardianship ended, they're telling the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims that Baha'u'llah can't be the Messiah, that he's not the second coming of Christ, that it doesn't matter if he was descendant of David because it ended anyway. So this is why the Baha'i faith that Sam's Guardian can go nowhere. It can't unite the people of the world because it doesn't have a message for the people of the world. It was God who sent Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad to the people and proclaimed the Davidic kingship to them in the past, so they would have a prophecy to expect the coming of the kings of the East, of Baha'u'llah and Abdulbaha and David's throne today. Now, the role that Baha'u'llah and Abdulbaha play as the supreme manifestation of God, the revealer of the essence of God and the center of God's covenant, is not the same role that the House of Justice or any of its members perform. No, including the president. Everybody today is a fallible individual. And if we work together under the provisions of the covenant, we're promised infallible divine guidance and protection from God and in what we do. And that we receive the protection of God individually and collectively. And it takes a different type of a person with a different type of an attitude to understand this. And this was Pepe's main thrust of what he was about is he wanted a community of fully alive, loyal, independent thinkers who would never deviate a hair's breadth from accepting the covenant and successorship as revealed in this dispensation.